generation that came, that popped up, every new generation, the generation before them found something to complain about. Either their hair, the way they danced, the way they spoke, the clothes they wore. There was always something to complain about. When my older brother and sister started going out, they were of the Afro generation, so they had the bell bottoms, the maxi coats, the Afro pick in the back of the head, platform shoes, and my parents had just freaked them out. See their son with braids in his hair, old school Jamaican. That wasn't going over really well with them. So yeah, they always thought their other generation was crazy. Even when I grew up and started going out to clubs and whatnot, we listened to rap music, was just coming out. And to my brother and sister, I seemed crazy. The clothes I wore, the high top fade, all of that seemed out of place for them. But this is the first generation. Generation Z is the first one where I think they're starting to notice there's something wrong within their own group. They're starting to notice that there's some madness among their own. Let's talk about it. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Excuse me. This is Keith, and welcome to the Ghetto Sapien channel. Yeah, so continuing. I'm going to talk about this conversation I had with my daughter this morning. She's a Gen Zer, and she and I got into it. Not got into it because we agree on a lot of stuff, and we agree on this subject too. So don't give me the wrong impression that we were having an argument, because she's on the same page. We noticed, well, she asked, like, with all this gender fluid stuff that's going on, all the gender confusion, what is the long-term plan with all that? What's society going to look like for her when she becomes, gets married and has children and all that stuff, and how it's actually making it harder for her to find a guy because of the gender confusion that they're putting out there in the stratosphere for her generation. She's worried because she could see she has an older brother, my son, her brother. He's from the generation before, and they drove cars. Young men. My son was driving when he was 18. I taught him how to drive stick. Most of his friends, not most, all of his friends know how to drive. And when they go out on dates, they pick up the girl in their car and they go out on a date. My daughter, in the very next generation, is completely unlike my son's generation. The males that she runs into, they don't drive. They don't have a driver's license. They're not as aggressive and bold and assertive as my son's generation. And I think it's because the devaluation of masculinity, and she notices it too among her own kind. But here's what's going to happen. Well, before I even get to that, let me just show you that I'm not just talking out my butt. There's an actual poll here in Axios. And it shows Americans who self-identify as LGBTQ in 2021 by generation. So we'll start the traditionalists, like my parents' generation, 0.8. And I read in the article, let me explain first what they mean by LGBTQ. That means everything. That means gay, lesbian, Q, I guess is queer, bisexual, and trans. So the traditionalist is 0.8%. I think, of course, it's higher than that, the LGBTQ. It's just that they... this is the Liberace era where then the Rock Hudson, those were the gay people among that time period. And they didn't really talk about themselves. They kept quiet about it. So 0.8 reflects, I think, they were suppressed. And we don't want that. You live your life perfectly fine. Baby boomers, 2.6%. That's my generation, like 1964, about the tail end of it. And 2.6, I still think a little low. There was no societal pressure to come out of the closet or anything like that. But I've seen gay people when I was a little kid. Not even gay. Growing up in New York on the subway, I saw like I saw a cross. We call them cross dressers. You'd see them on the subway. Even as a little kid, you could tell a guy's in a dress. But as a kid growing up in New York, I probably saw more cross dressers on the subway than some people saw at a Vegas nightclub. So it was not a big deal. At least when I was a kid, you knew they existed. You didn't care. Gen X, that's 4.2%, and I think that's probably a little more accurate. That's right about where I think it really should be. At that point, there was still no benefit to saying you're trans or anything like that. You didn't get any prizes or a lot of attention. So there was really no societal pressure for you to identify in any which way other than heterosexual or whatever you really felt. I think the 4.2% is probably as true a number as you're going to get. Then millennials, that's my son's era, 10.5%, that's high. I mean, that's more than double Gen X. And I think that's a result of the societal pressure to try and form kids and start telling them that gender fluidity is a good thing and that being heterosexual was kind of corny. Gen Z is off the chain. 20.8%. Look, unless there's some drugs in the water or a processed food that's turning kids like that, the only explanation, since it's not genetic, can't be, we didn't have genetic changes that rapid from one generation to the other. Explain this. This has to be psychological. When I saw that video of the lady from Disney, I think she's a vice president or an executive, and she was proudly saying she's the mother of a trans kid and a pansexual. What are the odds that she's leftist? She probably supports that lifestyle, and then she happens to have two kids that have that rare disorder. I'm gonna say it's a disorder, pansexual and trans. I think she had a little influence there as to how her children turned out, but she was proud, and I think she represents quite a bit of the culture that's pushing that on young kids and causing them to be confused. I think again they're not thinking about what is this going to do long term, because look, you could sit there and lie to these kids and tell them that there's more than two genders and you could be a man or a woman just by thinking about it. Eventually, though, reality is going to reassert itself. And there's going to be a lot of people that are going to grow up and they're going to realize that the people who they trusted were lying to them about everything and about the most important things. There's going to be young people who are going to either put off marriage or never marry because they're going to be confused about it. They're getting horrible signals from the older people, from the generation before them. They're going to put off having children until it's too late, because let's face it, there's a window of opportunity. If you want to have children, you need to have them within somewhere in your 20s is best. 30s is kind of pushing it, but if you're in your 40s and older and you decide and you find out you should have had children, that's terrible. I mean, there's no fixing that. There's no going back in time to correct that error, and that's coming from the generation, their parents, and the generation around them. They should be able to trust adults and give them help them with make wise decisions. But when you're lying, and you can't define male or female, come on, they're going to be looking at you like you're crazy, and they're going to know you lied to them eventually. If you're foolish enough to really promote that, you're really not thinking about what this is going to look like or what this is going to do a couple of years down the line. You know, this is going to seem kind of odd to say, especially for a black guy, but I'm telling you, from what I've experienced and what I've seen, we used to get rightfully upset when you would see someone who's raising their kid to be a racist asshole or a bigot of some sort, because that is terrible. That's a wicked thing to do to your kid. Not just because how they're going to treat other people, but it will limit them too if they're a racist piece of crap. And it should, you shouldn't be rewarded for that horrible behavior. But here's the thing. I had friends, their parents were jerks or racist POSs, and they were white, black, Asian, they sometimes their parents were intolerant. But you can raise a kid and try and poison his heart like that, and he can still recover. He or she can recover from that. They can repudiate their parents and reject what their parents are teaching them, and actually still love and respect their parents. Because they could just write it off and say that's how they were in their time, and I just ignore them. Again, they can still recover from being brought up that way, in that horrible way, and eventually become God-fearing or normal, healthy, mentally and morally sound individuals. However, but those poor kids who, we used to call tomboys and sissies, tom girls. No, I'm sorry. It's been so long. Because my sister was one. They used to call them tomboys, and the guys who like to play with dolls, they used to call them sissy boys and things like that. In my day, that's what they call them. Today, they give them puberty blockers if they're a boy or a girl, and if they're a girl, they give them radical mastectomies. That's butchering. You cannot recover from that. You're never going to be the same. So that's actually worse than raising your kid to be a bigot. And again, as a black person, that's pretty hard. That's a harsh thing to say, but that's I'm standing by it. I think you're better off raising your kid to be a piece of crap as a human being than to butcher them in a way they can't ever fix. Because again, the kid can fix himself if you raise him to give him the wrong moral code. He has a better chance than if you alter his hormones or her mammary glands. There's no turning back from that. So I'm running almost 15 minutes long on this, and I think I'm gonna end with that. That should blow some people's heads right there. So that's my comment. What's yours? Like, share, subscribe.